Today, we're going to explore a force you can't see, but one that operates on a totally mind-boggling scale. It's a silent, super powerful pressure that's at work right now in every single cell of your body and in technology that spans the globe. So let's get into it. So what is this force, really? What's the link between providing fresh water for an entire city and the basic mechanics of life itself? Well, the answer to both is osmotic pressure, and by the end of this, you'll see exactly how it all connects. To really see this force in action, let's start big. With one of humanity's greatest challenges, getting fresh water from the salt-filled ocean. This number, it's just staggering. This is the volume of fresh, drinkable water that a single desalination plant in Sorek, Israel can pull from the sea every single day. That's enough to fill over 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools. How they do it, though, that's the truly remarkable part. See, to make this happen, engineers had to figure out how to literally fight back against one of nature's most basic tendencies, a universal rule for liquids everywhere. And that rule is driven by a force we call osmotic pressure. To understand how we can reverse it, we first have to understand how it works in the first place. So let's dig into the science. How does nature use this force to constantly try and, find some balance? At its heart, osmosis is actually pretty simple. Imagine you've got salty water on one side of a special filter and fresh water on the other. Nature, well, it really doesn't like that imbalance. So the fresh water will naturally start moving across that filter toward the salty side, trying to dilute it to even things out. That movement, that natural flow, that's osmosis. And the real key here is that special filter, the semi-permeable membrane. It's very selective. It's like a bouncer at a club. It has these tiny openings that are just big enough for the small water molecules to pass right through, but they're way too small for the bigger salt particles. So the bouncer lets the water in, but the salt has to stay outside. Now let's apply this to a living cell, because depending on the solution it finds itself in, we see three totally different outcomes. If a cell is in a hypotonic solution, you can think hippo, like big and swollen, water rushes in. If it's in a hypertonic solution, think hyper, like super active, water rushes out. An isotonic solution, though, that's the sweet spot, where the concentration is perfectly balanced and water just flows in and out equally. And this has some dramatic real-world consequences. If you drop a red blood cell into a really salty, hypertonic solution, it'll shrivel up as all the water rushes out. But if you put it in pure hypotonic water, it will swell up like a balloon and can actually pop. This is exactly why IV drips in hospitals have to be isotonic. They have to be perfectly balanced to match the concentration inside our own bodies. So this isn't just some abstract chemistry idea, it's literally a matter of life and death for our cells. But why does this even happen? Why does water feel this need to dilute things? Well, the deep answer is something called entropy. It's just nature's unshakable preference for things to be mixed up and kind of chaotic. A solution with salt dissolved in it is simply more mixed up, more chaotic than pure water is. So the movement of water during osmosis isn't really a choice. It's just the universe pushing to maximize that beautiful mess. Scientists, of course, wanted to be able to predict this force, and the first great model for it was the Van Hoff equation. The idea behind it is pretty simple. The amount of pressure you'd need to stop that natural flow really just depends on two things: how much stuff is dissolved in the water and how hot it is. More salt, more pressure. Higher temperature, you guessed it, more pressure. But, reality is always a little bit more complicated. For instance, when you dissolve table salt, NaCl, in water, it doesn't just stay as one particle. Nope, it splits into two separate ions, a sodium ion and a chloride ion. And that's where the Van Hoff factor, what we call I, comes in. It's just a little correction for the true number of particles floating around. Since salt creates two particles, its I factor is about 2. And that means it generates double the osmotic pressure of something like sugar, which doesn't split apart at all. Okay, so now let's see how this chemical principle becomes a biological necessity. It's one thing for osmosis to just happen to a cell, but what's really amazing is how life has learned to use it. Get this. When one of your cells gets ready to divide, a process called mitosis, it actively messes with its own internal chemistry to increase the osmotic pressure difference across its membrane by more than 10 times. This is not an accident. This is a cell using physics as a tool.
So by carefully controlling the salt concentration inside itself, the cell deliberately sucks in water, creating this powerful internal pressure that forces it to puff up into a perfect sphere. And why does it do that? Because that round shape is absolutely essential for all its internal machinery to line up correctly and pull the copied chromosomes apart evenly. Osmotic pressure here isn't just some passive force, it's like a hydraulic jack that the cell uses to reshape itself so it can divide successfully.
And it doesn't stop there. Not even close. Research is showing that osmotic pressure is this active lever that cells pull to tell stem cells what to become, to organize their own membranes, and even to send signals. It's a fundamental regulatory tool that life has been mastering for billions of years. It's pretty incredible.
So, nature and life use osmosis to create balance and to get work done. But what happens when we decide we don't want balance? What happens when we want to reverse the flow? This is the absolute genius of reverse osmosis, or RO. Instead of just letting water flow from the fresh side to the salty side to find equilibrium, we apply a huge amount of external pressure to the salty side. We literally push so hard that we overpower that natural osmotic pressure and force the water molecules to move in the opposite direction, squeezing them through the membrane, leaving all the salt and other gunk behind. The goal isn't balance, the goal is purification. So just how much pressure are we talking about here? Yeah, a lot. For brackish water, which is just kind of slightly salty, you might need up to 17 bar of pressure. But for full-on seawater, the pressure you need is over 1,000 psi. To put that into perspective for you, that's more than 30 times the pressure in your car's tires. It is a massive engineering challenge. And this technology, it didn't just appear overnight. Osmosis was first scientifically observed way back in 1748, but it took over 200 years of research and innovation, including the invention of these game-changing new membranes in the 1960s to turn that simple observation into a practical technology. And by 1977, a city in Florida was using it at scale, and our world was pretty much changed forever. Today, reverse osmosis is everywhere, and I mean in places you would never expect. Of course, it makes drinking water, but it's also used to concentrate fruit juices and maple syrup by literally just removing the water. It produces the ultra-pure water that's needed for sensitive reef aquariums. It's a key step in making whey protein powder. It can even be used to make low-alcohol beer by taking out a mix of alcohol and water and then just adding the pure water back in. All right, so let's zoom back out for a second and put this all together. We've seen how osmotic pressure starts with something as basic as entropy, the universe's built-in preference for disorder. We saw how life doesn't just put up with that force, but actively uses it to perform its most critical jobs. And finally, we've seen how human ingenuity figured out how to overpower and reverse that exact same force to solve one of our most pressing global challenges. You know, this whole story is just such a powerful example of science in action. You observe a natural rule, you work to understand it deeply, and then you use that knowledge to engineer a solution that pushes against that very rule for our own benefit. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question. If we can rewrite the rules of liquid balance, what other fundamental forces of nature are we ready to tackle next?